Hello and welcome to Ananke's third edition of Women in Literature Festival. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome my amazing panelists, Safinah, Danish, Elahi, and Suchitra, Vijayan. We're waiting for Meena Kandasamy to join us, but in the interest of time, we'll begin our panel titled Exploring New Pathways to Creativity and Literature. And in this session, we will spotlight the evolution of different methods of exploring literature and the creative process, with innovation being the bedrock of all creative processes. The conversation plans to focus on new immersive approaches to storytelling, publishing, and experiential interpretations. I will begin with Safinah Elahi, who is a lawyer, novelist, and a poet. She has authored 2 books, a collection of poetry by the name The Unbridled Romance of Love and Pain, and the novel Eye on the Prize. The next novel, The Idle Stance of the Tippler Pigeon, is due to launch in July 2023 by the Neem Tree Press UK. She is also the founder of Reverie Publishers, which aims to guide the country's Anglophone emerging writers. She was officially nominated from Pakistan for the prestigious International Writers Fall Residency 2022 at the University of Iowa, where she participated as a fellow of the program. So welcome, Safinah. Suchitra Vijayan is an American writer, essayist, activist, and photographer working across oral history, state violence, and visual storytelling. Born and raised in Madras, India, she is the author of the critically acclaimed book Midnight's Borders, A People's History of Modern India. The book was called a genre-bending book of nonfiction made of stories, encounters, vignettes, and photographs about home, belonging, and displacement. Her essays, photographs, and interviews have appeared in the Washington Post, GQ, The Nation, the Boston Review, Foreign Policy, LitHub, Rumpus, Electric, Literature, NPR, NBC, and BBC. As an attorney, she previously worked for the United Nations War Crimes Tribunals in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, before co-founding the Resettlement Legal Aid Project in Cairo, which gives legal aid to Iraqi refugees. As a graduate student at Yale, she researched and documented stories along the Afghanistan-Pak border and was embedded with the US forces in Afghanistan. In addition, she is an award-winning photographer, the founder and executive director of the Polis Project, a hybrid research and journalism organization, and she lives in New York. So welcome, Suchitra.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll dive directly into the question. There's hardly anyone who doesn't speak for or against the role of emerging tech in our lives, be it the nitty-gritty of our day-to-day lives, our work, the future of work, as well as entertainment. Literature, art, and the creative process is certainly no different. In fact, innovation and the creative process are but a flip of the same coin. If we really look closer, so as a creative, an author, how do you respond to this interactivity, this intermingling, this immersion of these modern narratives, new media, and mediation by digital technologies? Suchitra, you can go first.
For me, I think of technology in very specific ways. I think that technology, creativity, innovation is fundamental to writing. And I think writers have complained about or have been in some conversation with technology as long as writing has existed. You see these conversations when the typewriter comes in, and then Kafka writes about his own ways of how the typewriter is affecting the way he's writing. You have T.S. Eliot say something like, the typewriter is good for lucidity, but not good for subtlety. Similarly, again, when you think about Rushdie and Joseph Conrad talks about how the digital processor fundamentally somehow changed the way he was writing. So I think technology is something that has always been a part of creative process, from when we were cavemen to what we're doing right now. I see it in 2 ways. One, the ways in which it can create the process, right? For me, technology is fundamental to how I think about work. Whether it is a lot of the work that I do is oral history, ethnography, which means the act of archiving, recording is fundamentally connected to the art of recording, which is the digital, the video, the audio, which then in some ways affects how I write. For me, as someone who is dyslexic, who has ADHD, technology is fundamental to me as a writer because it truly helps someone like me write, which maybe 20, 30 years ago could not have been possible. So for me, I think of technology as something that we can really, it's one, both critical to us as writers, but also something that we think about fundamentally. Having said that, technology is not, it's part of our social world and it's part of our social hierarchies, which means that researchers like Timid Gebru and others talk about that it's not that AI or technology or immersivity are all something independent. They are part of the social hierarchy. The thread that connects all of this is racism, casteism, colorism. The hierarchies of the social world are also translated to this virtual world. So for us to think about technology, I think we also have to keep those things in mind. What does it mean for us to talk about AI? What does it mean for us to talk about these technologies? When these technologies are not free of bias, they're not free of prejudice, they're not free of race, they're not free of hierarchies, I think that is truly where the challenge is. And it is important for us to navigate those questions in a meaningful way, because we are living in unprecedented times. And as we respond to the social upheavals of our time, our society, I think we have to have more nuanced understandings and takes on all of these conversations.
Safinah?
Sabin, I think, like Suchitra said, that, we have moved from basic automation to where we are today. And I think COVID has taught us so many things that we had never experienced before, which is, one of these examples is Zoom. We wouldn't think about promoting a book or having a conversation or even going to a meeting. We never think that this could be done via Zoom or via, it could be done digitally. But because of COVID, we learned that a lot of things can now be done online and are as effective, if not more. It can reach a wider audience. It can help in, like I said, book promotion. My own novel was released during COVID, and all our promotions, all reaching out to the audiences, was done via digital platforms. I think it's important when we talk about technology that it's twofold, right? Is it harming? Is it harming us? Is it not providing that human element, to the reader, to the writer? Or is it providing a wider platform? Is it helping us, or helping people? Like my daughter is an auditory learner. She listens to audiobooks. So now when audiobooks weren't around, she obviously wouldn't be reading. So she's still sort of, inhaling those texts through her ears. She's listening to them. So when you talk about technology, we also have to give it credit that, it's reaching out to people it otherwise wouldn't. Saying that, there is a certain human element to having conversations as well. The attention span of a digital live feed and in-person conversation is also different. You scroll through various digital media and are not able to really observe and understand what the conversation is about. So there are two ways to think about technology, but I think there is only acceptance that comes with writers and readers, and you have to accept that this is here to serve us, and we can possibly only let us sort of widen our perspective through technology.
Thank you so much, Safinah. And we have Meena Kandasamy with us. Meena, if you could
Hi. I want to wonderful to meet all of you. I'm on a hotel's connections, so the
okay.
Wi-Fi isn't the best thing, but yeah,
All right.
I can show you my face and then go back. So that's me. But yeah, I think lose the audio if I keep
It's
the.
absolutely fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely
sure.
fine. I'll quickly read your bio. Meena Kandasamy is an anti-caste activist, poet, novelist, and translator. Her writing aims to deconstruct trauma and violence while spotlighting the militant resistance against caste, gender, and ethnic oppressions. She explores this in her poetry and prose, most notably in her books of poems such as Touch and Militancy, as well as her three novels, The Gypsy Goddess, When I Hit You, and Exquisite Cadavers. Her latest work is a collection of essays, The Orders Were to Rape You, Tamil Tigress of the Alarm Struggle. Activism is at the heart of her literary work. She has translated several political texts from Tamil to English. Her novels have been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, International Dylan Thomas Prize, Jhalak Prize, and the Hindu Lit Prize. She holds a PhD in sociolinguistics. Her op-eds and essays have appeared in the White Review, Guernica, The Guardian, and New York Times. So welcome, Meena.
Hi,
And
thanks for having me here.
so, Meena, I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm going to shorten it. As a creative, as an author, how do you respond to this interactivity, this intermingling of modern narratives, the new media, and mediation by digital technologies?
I'm actually quite how do I put that? I'm very curious about how this works. And so in the very early days of ChatGPT, I sort of co-wrote a story with ChatGPT. Like look, and I think it was published in the Mint. But for me, it was like, uh, it's really interesting to go and to look at artificial intelligence and realize that obviously on the one hand we're always afraid of this pitfall of bias, right? That often it's sexist, like Alexa doesn't listen to me as much as Shivan does to my 4-year-old. So, or that those who are doing this kind of digital or electronic profiling, there tends to be all of these racist elements ingrained in identification, in verification, and things like that. But sometimes moving beyond that, you realize that there are things about artificial intelligence that are in some ways that in some ways can also help us think better, because one of those things is like what's your ideology or where you come from in terms of looking at the world, and then we have been taught to think about the world in a certain way. And sometimes like the thing with artificial intelligence, or and these huge data sets that are at the heart of it, is that it has infinite memory. And what we actually perceive, and sometimes accessing it is um like a short rapid course in history, because on the one hand it takes you out of this idea that what is happening right now is something that's happening in isolation, and you don't need a political science degree to realize that, because these are things that have happened, that are happening elsewhere as well. Or like to so sometimes it's like uh the way, and also because, oh, give me a second. And also because the very interesting thing is that because of the perceived neutrality of artificial intelligence, it can help us in some ways push ideas better than if you'd be like, oh, but this is my opinion. Like, let's say, if I say that it's always dangerous that, writers are being imprisoned or something like that, then it looks like, okay, but she's a writer. That's the most obvious thing she's going to say. But then, you go to ChatGPT, and in some ways, ChatGPT tells you, okay, that writers being imprisoned has taken place in Turkey and Egypt and Russia, and in, Russia under Stalin or something. And then you realize the weight of what's happening, right? Like, it just puts you in this context. So I do think that, sometimes I think one of those things is speed. Another thing is obviously scale. But also the other thing is we always have to, like, all of us come equipped with very, nobody has infinite skill sets, right? Like, I come from a very literature background. Suchitra comes from, legal background, political work, all of this. But obviously, we wouldn't be having so much information at our disposal. Like, it would take, conscious learning, and it would take a lot of conscious engagement. But sometimes I believe that, I would look at AI as something that aids creatives, and I don't think it replaces them. So I have a certain kind of, positive, or I just want to think that new things have to be embraced and understood, and and played with and experimented with.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you. And this really resonates because, I do think also that AI is here to help. And going back to Suchitra, when you talked about typewriters, and I go further back with the Gutenberg, the printing press, and innovation has always been there, and it has always been looked upon as a thing of dread. And apologies for the weird example that I'm going to give you, but it sort of reminded me of Bran the Broken from Game of Thrones, who in the end was being protected because he was the epitome of memory. And like Meena just said, so I don't know if that makes sense. And the powers that be, or we're basically afraid of that change, or of that revolution, because because then we have memory. How do I put it? History is there, or memory is there, and that is why we're, I don't know, we're scared of it. Does that make sense? I'll start with you, Suchitra.
Are you talking about the fear of the technology, or
Yes.
the fear of...
Yeah, fear of the technology because it documents memory.
I think there are multiple layers to it, right? So I think who gets to document memory and history is the powerful, right? I think the idea that power gets to dictate memory, materiality, history, I think that's what we're afraid of. And now perhaps the powerful now have one more arsenal at their tool, which is now created. And for me, thinking about AI, the conversations about AI is something that I've been on the margins listening in for almost 15 years now, because I don't know if you remember 15 years ago, Internet of Things was very big, everybody was talking about disruptors, everybody was talking about, and one thing that I've constantly heard about all of this, I think fear is, I'll come to fear, but I just want to set the context. I think if you go back to what people like Timnit Gebru have been talking about this for a really long time, is that AI as we have today is immensely powerful. It's immensely powerful, and it can do two things. It can democratize education. I feel like we're having the same conversations we had 10, 15 years ago when we said, can Twitter democratize the world? Can Twitter create revolutions? The point is, perhaps it can, but whoever owns the means of production, whoever owns the means of knowledge, has immense power. So we already know the issues that we have. One view of AI, mostly by brown and Black scholars and writers and thinkers, is that it's a huge autocomplete machine. It autocompletes, and it gets better and better and better. Second, we've talked about the ways in which brown and Black bodies were put in service of creating open AI. Now we know what happened if I'm not mistaken, in Kenya and other parts of the world, people were paid less than minimum wage to get this AI up and running. So the capitalist oppression, the exploitation of labor is already part of AI. AI is not just machine learning. It requires human bodies to feed it. And those human bodies are already being they're already being treated in a particular way. We know that we know for a fact that you needed vast number of people to work on the system, who are underpaid, undervalued, treated poorly in order for the system to up and run, to create the system. The underclass of productivity is, everybody's now an underclass of productive person who has to produce productivity in order for the system. We know that these systems are inherently racialized and biased, right? Just as we had the initial Google algorithms to when we first had the digital technology that couldn't scan particularly Black faces, but also darker skinned South Asians. So that is, of course, running through all of this. So I think the fear comes from people who are already in disenfranchised positions where we do not know where power relations are going to lie, how is it going to fall. On the other hand, as I said, technology is also immensely powerful. It can do things, it can aid in learning, it can bring knowledge. But now we have to acknowledge that knowledge itself is being siloed away. Not everybody has access to ChatGPT. Not everybody has access to a phone. Not everybody has access to Twitter. Not everybody. So I think we really need, and also a lot of this is particularly history, and just as history and memory is local, I think the ways in which technology permeates our life is also, while there is a global resonance, I think it's also local. I think I'm not afraid of this, but what I am looking at is how do we have conversations about this? And I think that is where writers become phenomenal ambassadors of searching for truth, like the fact that Meena wrote this story, and now we know what that act of writing a story means for us. I don't know if fear is the right emotion, but definitely I think there are ways for us to understand that this is far more complicated than just about technology and its what it means for us.
Safinah, would you like to add something?
Yeah. I would actually adding on to what Suchitra is saying. There's a book called Remote Control by a Iranian American author, and that also talks about surveillance. And which brings me to this documentary. I'm not sure what the name is, but it's either called The Social Network or The Social Circle, something like that, on Netflix, which is also basically capitalism. Their surveillance on what you're tapping on, and what videos you're looking at, and how more can they sort of pull you in, what more can they make you buy. So when we talk about fear of technology, I think it's important that we acknowledge that all of this is also, there is a mastermind behind that technology as well. These big corporations are also sort of leaning into what our daily lives are about and how vulnerable we are. And we're also leaving behind a digital footprint. When we were younger, we weren't concerned of, what pictures were out there of us. Our children are posting things. There's a lot of bullying. There's a lot of, it can't be removed. I'm just wary of the fact that once a thing is on the internet, you cannot take it down. So the conversations that you have, the articles that are posted, whether they're fake, even there was actually recently a scandal where ChatGPT also took out an article which was faulty. It was a fake article. And
You're on the mute. Yeah. Just for a second.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying that ChatGPT also, there was a scandal just now. I was reading through something that they, sourced an article which was a fake article. So, technology can also have its hang-ups. And I do agree with Meena as well, that when we research, so, when we were younger, our research would be the library. But now our first sort of go-to space is Google. It's a digital library. There's so many avenues that also open up, but I'm also wary of that, that surveillance and that sort of power that technology has over us. That makes me get a few hangups as well. So, I think it's a twofold feeling.
Meena, would you like to add to that?
Yes, no, I definitely agree with both what Suchitra, flagged up and what Safina has also pointed out. Obviously, I think digital footprints, and the kind of surveillance that accompanies it, but also the devaluation of human labor that produces it, and also the question of access that Suchitra talked about. I think all of these are really, really core issues and are fundamentally, like, I think it's, but these kind of questions also exist even for writing, right? Like, writing is not something everyone can access. Writing is not something everyone can afford to do. Writing is something that has these networks of power. So obviously, I completely agree with them, and I think, yeah, there are all of these structural issues, which we have to take into cognizance when we understand artificial intelligence. Uh, at the same time, the idea is that you know for me, the idea is that as much as I'm very critical, of course, I completely agree with both of them for their terrific points. I still think that what's happening here with artificial intelligence, and also not AI that we don't see, because there's a lot of AI we don't see, right? Like AI, whether it's an AI in a washing machine, or AI that's running between our systems, or AI that does our navigation. So it's everywhere. But what I mean is, we have, for one, a kind of AI that can interact with us in many ways, and these type of interactions, I think it kind of changes what it is. I think it kind of changes your understanding of embodiment, right? It kind of changes, like, okay, and I'm speaking this not as not from a political perspective, but from a very personal position of trying to see, like, when we talk about embodiment, we talk about the mind, we still think it's something that's within us. But I think sometimes when you work through and with these systems, you exist outside of yourself, and and in those moments, like, who is the individual, and where like, you could say, I left my brain behind at home, but and you wouldn't be lying, you know what I mean? Like, if you're without your phone and you just lost, and like, so these are like, and I really realized that it kind of um blurs some of these very hard distinctions. And for me, I think, obviously, we have to be very much at the forefront of how capitalism, big data can come together, as well as how repressive states can use all of this data. So I think, all of these are layered, really multidimensional problems. But I think, as a creative writer, I think it's really, like, it's really funny what it can do, what machines are capable of. And I think that the more you realize they're capable of being you, I think the more it kind of gives you this opportunity to move beyond yourself and to realize what it is that makes me. Like, you could go on ChatGPT and say, write a tweet in the style of Meena Kandasamy, and it's going to give you a tweet that sounds more me than me. And I've tried this. And I've used these tweets sometimes, because I'm like, no, I'm not going to do the thinking, because someone else is thinking exactly as I would think. And the question there is then that, so what is it that makes you you, if a machine can be you? And I think these are like, obviously, I think some people would feel violated if a machine was trying to be them. I wouldn't feel violated. I would just be like, oh no, I have to go back to being my unpredictable self. I have to go back to being something that a machine cannot read, you know something that a machine, like, and there, I think, there, in that particular moment, there's so much scope and so much freedom, because you don't have to be yourself anymore, because the machine can do you. So who are you? I think, for me, it's like, it's it's kind of, on the one hand, it's the most modern thing, but on the other hand, it's the most postmodern thing as well. But on the other hand, it's also this absolutely ancient, dreaded question, like, who am I? So yeah, I find it really fascinating. So yeah.
It's really interesting, and it got me thinking. Like you mentioned, there's AI, in the washing machine, or things that serve us. And now maybe we feel that that power is slipping away from us through artificial intelligence, because it's, getting smarter. Is that so? Safina, I'll begin with you, then Suchitra and Meena. You're on the mute.
Sorry, I was smiling when you were saying that, because I think it is about power. You feel so powerless because you're like, no, I'm this intelligent human mind, and how dare like technology replace me, So when you hear about these things that, like the tweet you talked about, I had a conversation with a colleague recently, and he was telling me how awesome, ChatGPT is, and how it's going to replace all writers. And, obviously I took it to heart, because I'm like, no, writers can never be replaced, because, we're at the beginning, there is a storyteller, at the beginning of everything. I feel that, whether it's a movie, it's a book, it's a marketing campaign, there's somebody who's writing content, there's somebody who's telling a story. And the storyteller is also someone who is creating empathy. And that is a basic human emotion. I personally have not interacted with ChatGPT yet. I mean, I had like my sister-in-law, type things, and she's like, "Oh, this is so great." And I think I'm one of those people who will have trouble accepting that there is smarter technology, replaceable humans, all of that. Right now, my hang up is that no, it can't be as human, and it cannot write.
It's decentralizing the human.
And it's difficult to accept. I'm like, no, it's probably for nonfiction. It's probably like facts that it can pick up. I'm sure it can't tell a better story, but facts are facts. It's imitating. It's getting together this information that you would hire somebody to, write an article on something, and AI is doing that. And previously we'd look at machines. You said the washing machine, the refrigerator, the AC. All of that is technology, right, that we embraced. But when it talked about replacing us, we get threatened. This was just convenience before, and now it's, I think, kind of taking over.
Suchitra?
I think it really is about each generation's relationship to that particular technology, right? I have young Gen Z students that I teach, and their relationship to technology is very, very different than even mine. And for them, ChatGPT is not about, for them, it's an assistant, it's a virtual assistant. Just as Google was, for my generation, going into university, or 2004, 2005, when Gmail came out, it was amazing, right? So it was not, our relationship with these technologies is very much mediated by the time that we are in. My students don't see it as, they use it, and I allow the use of ChatGPT in school because they are going to use it. I much rather they use it. And for me, it's also, I'm learning from seeing how they use it, because I think our understanding of knowledge and all of that is very different. So when they use it as a virtual assistant. When I say virtual assistant, for them, they use it as, hey, can you summarize 3 arguments that someone makes, right? This information is already available on Google, maybe as an essay, as a review, but what ChatGPT does is summarize it for them. Now, I'm okay with them using the summarized text, but beyond that, they still have questions. We still have a conversation. We are still having a conversation about context and history and place. We are having conversations about how does this relate to something. The human mind is fascinating because if given 4 different things, how Meena would write about it is very different than how I would write about it as against what you would or how Safinah would. What makes writing so incredibly brilliant and fascinating is the connections that we make, right? There's certain ways in which we look at objects and the connections we make, the way we see, because not all of us are taught the same way to see. Not all of us are taught the same way to write. Not all of us grow up with the same things. One would argue that maybe technology has homogenized a lot of this, but maybe it hasn't. And I think that is something that I'm very curious to see. Second, I think I am not so afraid of the technology, but what I'm afraid of is what then becomes of us as, and I think your question was incredibly beautiful when the sentence was the author as a creator, the author as a subject, the author as the consumer, the author as also the surveilled subject, and also the audience. So I think I am more curious moving forward, figuring out what this means for us. Now, who gets to hold that power? Who gets now to, I mean, it's Marx, right? Whoever owns the means of production was the winner of the industrial age. In Web 1, whoever owned the means of knowledge, and that is still going to be the case, whoever owns knowledge. And for me, the question is who gets to own knowledge, especially in India right now, given the censorship. The Mughal chapter in NCERT textbooks are completely being erased away, which kind of goes back to your same question about what about history and what about memory? If AI is trained on existing publicly available material, and if we go on to remove material from our textbooks and archives, it's very easy for us to train AI with the same things, just as chapters can be removed from textbooks, just as there are websites and information that was and reports that were available years ago that no longer are available. I don't know if Meena remembers, one of the first emails I ever wrote to Meena was asking if she had the legal judgments of the brilliant book that she wrote. And her response was, I'm so sorry, Suchitra, I moved and we no longer have the physical copies of that legal judgment. So those legal judgments that were available, say 10 years ago, weren't available 5 years ago. So what does it mean for us to think about the archive and memory? Because AI is also going to be trained by the same people who are making these archives. So in terms of power, that is what I am very curious about. I'm curious about what forms of resistance would emerge when we know that these technologies are being used. And I think I think it's remarkable that we are in these exciting times that we can have these conversations and then we can create and write and resist and riot. But I don't know, I'm feeling, I'm in this place where I'm still trying to come to terms with all of these systems, but most importantly, how do we interact with it?
Meena, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, yes, actually, not to all of it, because yeah, I understand, Safinah, and the idea of replacing writers. And sometimes I let Alexa replace me as a mother. So my kids go and they tell Alexa, play hide and seek with me, and Alexa plays hide and seek with them. So I'm like, fine, if I can get 10 minutes to, I go and have a shower or wash my hair and be a civilized human being, I'm like all for Alexa. So it doesn't matter. I don't feel possessive about either being a writer or being a mother, as long as you can meet some basic human needs for yourself. But no, going on to, I think, the question that Suchitra spoke about, which is linked to I think memory and the removal from the textbooks. I think one of the biggest issues of digital washing, and because I think in some cases you are allowed to, I think all these search engines sometimes let you remove stuff. But I think one of the biggest digital cons that I have seen, and which has been really the most striking for me, is that in 2002, a few years before 2002, I started using the internet. So in 2002, when the Gujarat riots happened, a lot of pictures were shared online. There were a lot of websites online. But even 10 years later, trying to find information, there was nothing. There's literally nothing. Like, the kind of images I saw coming out of the press at that time, you couldn't find it. Yeah, maybe I could go down to the local archive and, look up a newspaper. But the kind of information that was there, where did it disappear? So, you could do something on a very, like a kind of massacre, a kind of something on a genocidal scale, and then it would just cease to exist, So obviously, the way these kind of, something just pretends that it didn't happen, or it didn't, there's no visual memory of it. I think these are like, really scary questions, because who defines the ethics? Who defines the ethics for AI is obviously corporations. And what defines corporations is, greed and, capitalist private profit-making motives. So, and this can lead to, very, very dangerous situations. So obviously, it's not just that we use them, but we also create systems where because a lot of this is actually open source, we can also create equivalent systems where things don't get, erased or something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. At one point, I was thinking that, AI is really democratizing the landscape. But on the other hand, and of course, no fan of Trump, but when asked to write something about Trump, on Chat GPT, there was an article that I read. It basically sort of like, to summarize it, it refused to write something about Trump. But on the other hand, when asked to write about Biden, it basically wrote 2 to 3 paragraphs. So is it really democratizing the landscape, the digital realm? Suchitra?
I mean, are you talking very specifically about AI or just generally about technology?
Technology include emerging tech, basically.
I mean, I think I really want to kind of go back and locate this in a moment when we were having very similar conversations with Twitter and the revolution in Egypt. We were having this thing about, oh, can Twitter now bring democracy to now when we think back, we realize, I mean, there's still people who continue to have those conversations, but we realize that technology exists within a social framework. As technology democratized the world, of course it has. And I think, for example, let me give you an example from my own. For example, an organization like Polis Project doesn't have a manual, it doesn't have physical publication. Our entire presence is digital and online. If not for Twitter and Instagram and digital ways of disseminating information, our capacity to reach out to networks that are global yet local, we wouldn't exist as an organization. The fact that we are able to enable these conversations, yes. If I had tried building an organization like Polis Project even 10, 20 years ago, would not have been possible, because I really don't, while I come from certain amount of definitely caste privilege. I don't think I come from the kind of literary pedigree or political elite in India that would automatically open doors for me, right? I think we also have to acknowledge the kind of gatekeeping and hierarchies that exist within literature, culture, knowledge production. If you don't come from these spaces, 20 years ago, it was perhaps impossible for someone like me to build an organization. But today it was possible because digital technologies, the access to platforms have become more democratized. But I also have to place it within the context of my existing privileges. I'm still urban. I still had access to English language in India. I'm still born to an upper caste father. My mobility has often helped. While I had an Indian passport for the longest of time, my mobility was still never hindered in ways that are hindered for many people. So yes, while we place it within my own privileges, it still was something that helped me build something which otherwise would not have been possible for me for many reasons. Now, have we been able to completely transcend those things? Was Twitter able to completely create a revolution? No. It mobilized people. But like all social movements, we are very much grounded in the historicity of our life. I lived in Cairo between 2008 and 2009. And leading up, many of my friends were at the square at Tahrir when it happened. And very soon, it became clear that it was not just Twitter, but so much else was happening on the ground. People were fighting about what it meant, what this revolution meant. very soon conversations became about, oh, women should stop complaining because we are talking about larger liberations, when women were being harassed on the square. And soon it became very clear that any revolution that didn't accommodate the dignity of the female body, what I'm trying to say is that these great ideas of revolution and resistance don't happen overnight. They don't happen just because of digital technologies. We are grounded within the historical and political realities of our time. And I think the same thing is happening right now when a lot is happening. We have authoritarian regimes across the world. Women are being stripped of their right for reproductive right in the US. In India, of course, we have the case where every single day is a dispatch from hell when a writer, a thinker, an activist is being picked up. We have Muslim communities being completely traumatized. Just the dispatches from India are like hell every single day. So for us, the question then is not how does technology help us solve these problems? No, nobody's thinking about technology. We are thinking about how do we deal with this problem, and technology then becomes the background score for all of this. And the more access we have to this, I think will help, but democracy is not a given. We have to fight to own our spaces. I just want to finish one small thing, so I don't want to take long, is that when Elon Musk took over Twitter, everybody said, oh, we're going to leave Twitter, we're going to leave Twitter. But it's very interesting to see that a lot of brown and Black activists on Twitter said, we're not going to leave because this is our public space. This is where we built our audience. This is where we fought to build our audience. This is where we had our arguments. We are not leaving. We are going to fight for this public space. And I think that is a very interesting moment for us to understand that. But on the other hand, a lot of other privileged, predominantly white academics felt we are going to leave. So it's also interesting for us to see how various communities respond to technology and the network and how we think about these things.
Meena, would you like to add to that before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, no. I was, just completely lost in thought and listening to what Suchitra was saying. So yes, I do agree that we have to fight for our right to, exist online and to create these spaces. So yeah, I'm largely in agreement with what she says.
Great. Any last words before we wrap up?
Okay, I just had a couple of interesting things to say, which is that in some ways we're talking about democratization. I think ChatGPT, for instance, like as one particular example of AI, it's tried really hard to not take political positions. So whatever it says can be based on because by definition it cannot have bias, or by definition it cannot take a stand. But sometimes you just have to scratch the surface, like, of course it cannot take a stand, but obviously it can, lead you towards, finding information, or it can lead you to, lead you to getting to know things better. And I always also think that, especially very much, as someone who sees very small children all the time, and what you call digital natives, and I think for them it's really very seamless because they have not lived in a world without it, right? So it's whether it's a song selection or whether it's YouTube. And like I used to often think, and this is not even necessarily AI, it's a lot of it is just tech, right? So I used to think that if my kids are watching a tablet, what kind of nonsense is going to fill their heads. But actually what children are being fed with seems to be anxiety and dread. So there's so much, like, and they're really concerned, like, at some point you wonder, like, we never lived in a world, I don't know, when at 6 or 5 or 4 thinking things are bad, but children are talking about climate change. They're talking, at least I don't know, I don't think my son is an exceptional case, because he's watching the same YouTube that a lot of kids are watching, right? And they're talking about stuff like, what's causing global warming, or why cutting trees is bad. And that kind of, which necessarily their curriculum or textbooks does not address. I think in many ways it's catastrophic, but in many ways we are having a new generation which somehow are dealing with machines, but are turning out to be more empathetic than us, So I find that, all of this is really, this is a huge churning that's going on. So, sometimes we have to look at the longer picture, the broader picture kind of situation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. When you talk about, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, there's so many terms for the new generation, and they're born digitally. So maybe, and you rightly said they're digital natives, so everything is more seamless for them, and perhaps that is why, belonging to a world of pandemic and a society that is basically, I guess, decentralizing humanity, and maybe that's why they're more compassionate. They or I'm hoping, or I just perceive it that way, that maybe we have something to learn from them. So Chitra, I'll end this with you.
Yeah, but I also, just a reminder that Gen Z is being raised by millennials and Gen X, which is actually a pretty remarkable generation. Maybe it's
Absolutely.
also a generation that is, I think Meena's absolutely right. I think our children are definitely more empathetic and they see the world very differently because the crisis is real for them. But it also comes from the fact that empathy is taught at home. I feel that I don't want to speak for my generation, at least as most millennials, I think we had to struggle to unlearn a lot of prejudice that was taught to us, at least to me. And in that process, I think we strived, maybe not very successfully, and I think that process is still ongoing. We saw multiple wars to a financial crisis. I remember seeing my friends being pulled into interrogation vans. I don't know if people remember, there used to be interrogation vans that were set up around Europe the years after 9/11, where they would just randomly pick up kids, especially young Muslim men, and pull them into these interrogation vans. We grew up seeing all of this, and I think there is a certain amount of empathy that I think that we also have taught them. Maybe we have not, but they're also raised in these households where I think the language is slightly more available. I think we are walking towards an historically remarkable time where there is so much happening, but I also see the resistance to it thriving. And I see technology as a backscore, right? I think there's so much we can do. My phone today has more computing power than what launched the moon, what the first expedition. What we do with it is important. And I don't want to be fearful of it, but I do want to think about ways in which it can infinitely make the work all of us do, whether it is publishing, whether it is writing, whether it's resisting, whether it is building a community. If we can do that in a more meaningful way, I think we're good. I think there's a lot of hope and love and kindness there.
Wow. Thank you so much, Suchitra. And with this, we're unfortunately at the end of our session. Thank you so much, Suchitra, Meena. Safinah had to leave, but thank you so much, all of you, for this wonderful conversation. And with this, we wrap up day one of Ananke's Women in Literature Festival. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Sabin, and thank you, Suchitra. And yeah, I'm also, I noticed that Safinah has left. It's also because of the time zones, but you managed to pull us all together really nicely. For me, it's the end of day, 45. I think Suchitra is morning, right?
It's afternoon, and I
Yes,
think we're all having a coughing bout.
yeah. Thank you so much once again. Take care. Bye.
Take care, everyone.